It was 3:47 in the morning when the black unmarked Suburbans rolled silently through the northwest gate. No sirens, no lights, just the low rumble of heavy-duty diesel engines cutting through the frozen January air. Within 60 seconds, the former President of the United States was no longer in the White House. This was not a drill. This was not a transition. This was an extraction. The call came through the earpiece of the uniformed division officer at the guard booth at exactly 3:42 a.m. 5 minutes later, the world changed. Those 5 minutes represent the most opaque, unsettling gap in White House security history. What happened between that transmission and the departing taillights is a story so tightly classified that even senior members of the former president's own staff were left in the dark, literally standing on the north lawn in their dress shoes, wondering why the motorcade had left without them. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand the architecture of power. The White House is not just a home. It is a fortress designed to keep occupants safe from every conceivable threat. But on this morning, the threat was not outside the gates. It was inside the walls. When the Secret Service moves a principal under cover of darkness without advance notice, without the usual 30-minute warm-up on the engines, it means one thing. The calculus of safety has catastrophically collapsed. The former president had been in the residence for approximately 6 hours. He had dined with family, reviewed briefing materials, and retired around 11 p.m. The overnight shift was routine. But at 3:30 a.m., a junior duty officer in the Joint Operations Center noticed something anomalous in the internal communications matrix, a fragmented signal that should not have existed. Within 12 minutes, that anomaly escalated into a Level 7 security alert, the kind reserved for nuclear incidents or active sieges. Let's talk about the men and women who made this call. The Secret Service director did not wake the President of the United States. He did not alert the Chief of Staff. Instead, a small, invisible cadre of career agents, men who have taken oaths that supersede political loyalty, made a unilateral decision. They determined that the most powerful man in the free world, or at least the man who had recently held that title, could no longer remain under this roof. It is a decision that has no modern precedent. The agents who entered the second-floor residence moved with practiced silence. They did not knock. They did not announce themselves beyond the quiet, firm identification every protector knows. Us, sir. The former president, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and crowds, was reportedly standing in the hallway in his bathrobe, confused, refusing to move until one agent placed a hand on his elbow. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a directional vector. Now, consider the optics. This is a man who flew on Air Force One, who delivered the State of the Union from this very chamber, who walked the colonnade with kings and prime ministers. And here he was at 3:47 a.m. being walked, not marched, but firmly guided through the palm room toward the waiting SUV. His personal valet was left behind. His private secretary was left behind. Even the famed nuclear football, the 45-pound briefcase containing the nation's most devastating secrets, remained in its secured alcove. He left with only the clothes he was wearing and the agents on his arms. What the public does not understand is the geography of humiliation. The diplomatic reception room, through which foreign dignitaries entered to great fanfare, became the exit ramp for an unceremonious departure. The former president's feet crossed the same marble floor where he had once welcomed the Pope. But on this morning, the only witness was a lone janitorial staff member who later signed a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive that even mentioning the weather that night could trigger a federal investigation. The vehicles did not proceed to the usual military lodging at Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall. They did not head to the vice president's residence. Instead, the motorcade took a circuitous route through northwest D.C., doubling back twice, executing what agents call dry cleaning. Maneuvers designed to shake surveillance, both real and perceived. Their destination was not disclosed to the White House Situation Room until the vehicles had already crossed the Key Bridge into Virginia. Let's pause on the human element. The former president's daughter was asleep in the Blair House, the official guest residence directly across Pennsylvania Avenue. She was not informed of her father's departure until 6:17 a.m., nearly 2.5 hours after the fact. When she was told, her first question was not where, but why. To this day, sources say, she has not received a satisfactory answer. The silence from the protective apparatus has been absolute. Meanwhile, inside the White House, the machinery of government continued its oblivious hum. The night shift operators in the Naval Observatory prepared the vice president's morning brief. The social office printed seating charts for an upcoming state dinner. The pastry chef arrived at 4:30 a.m. to begin proofing dough. None of them knew that the principal they were all in some way serving was already 70 miles away, sitting in a secure room at a location we are not permitted to name. We must examine the geopolitical temperature at that exact hour. At 3:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, it was 4:47 p.m. in Beijing. It was 11:47 a.m. in Moscow. It was 8:47 a.m. in London. In each of these capitals, there are men and women whose entire professional existence is dedicated to monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum for exactly this kind of signal, the unexpected movement of a high-value American principle. What did they see? What did they infer? And most disturbingly, what did they already know that we did not? Let's talk about the intelligence gaps. In the 72 hours prior to this incident, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence had disseminated 3 warnings regarding potential insider threats within the federal security apparatus. These are usually boilerplate language, the kind of CYA paperwork that circulates during any administration change. But this time, the warnings were accompanied by something rarely seen: a specific technical annex regarding compromised credentials inside the executive branch network. The former president's own security detail was divided in those final moments. Some agents were in the motorcade, some were left behind. It is an unspoken rule in the Secret Service that the detail leader never, under any circumstances, leaves the principal's side unless physically incapacitated. Yet on this night, the detail leader was reportedly in the lower press office when the vehicles departed. He had been told to stand by for further instruction. He is currently on administrative leave. What was the trigger? We have spoken to 4 sources with direct knowledge of the threat matrix, none of whom are authorized to speak, all of whom spoke on condition of profound anonymity. They describe a confluence of signals that, when correlated, painted a picture so alarming that the standard chain of command was abandoned. One source used the phrase "friendly fire risk." Another used the word "compromise." Neither would elaborate. The resident staff noticed something strange earlier that evening. The former president had requested dinner in the treaty room, an unusual choice. He spent much of the meal looking at his secure tablet, barely touching his food. His mood was described as contemplative, not agitated. One butler recalled that he asked a peculiar question: "How much of this building do you think is actually secure?" The butler assumed it was rhetorical. He now realizes it was existential. Let's go back to the motorcade. 7 vehicles in total, 2 of them identical Suburbans equipped with the presidential secure package: armor plating, run-flat tires, oxygen supply, and a full suite of countermeasures. Witnesses near the Washington Hilton, where the motorcade was spotted refueling at a non-public facility, noted the absence of the usual ambulance support vehicle. The former president's personal physician was not present. This suggests the movement was so urgent that medical protocols were secondary. The communications blackout was absolute. Typically, when a principal moves, there is a cascade of notifications. The White House Communications Agency alerts the press pool. The military aide alerts the nuclear command center. The advance team alerts the destination venue. None of that happened. The former president arrived at his destination, a private residence belonging to a longtime donor, with no one there to receive him except 2 local police cruisers that had been hastily diverted. We must ask the structural question: who is in charge when the chain of command is broken? The 25th Amendment provides mechanisms for temporary transfer of power due to medical incapacity. It does not account for the sudden, unexplained evacuation of a former president from the residence. There is no legal precedent. There is no playbook. The men who made this decision were operating in a legal gray area so vast it constitutes its own weather system. The Joint Chiefs of Staff were not notified. The Secretary of Defense was asleep at his home in McLean. The Attorney General was at a diplomatic dinner. By the time any of these officials became aware of the situation, the former president had already been secured at the off-site location for over an hour. When the White House counsel finally reached the Secret Service director, the only response given was, "The situation is contained." It was not an explanation. It was a verdict. Consider the emotional geography of the former president himself. This is a man who spent 4 years inside the most protected bubble on earth. He became accustomed to the whir of machinery, the constant presence of earpieces, the subtle shift in posture of agents when danger approached. To be suddenly removed from that bubble, in the dark, without ceremony, must have felt like a form of political death. One source described his expression as resigned, not angry. That may be the most chilling detail of all. The media did not learn of this movement for 17 hours. When the first inquiries were made, the official response was a masterclass in obfuscation. The former president conducted a previously unscheduled movement for personal reasons. Personal reasons. This is the language used when the truth is too operationally sensitive or too politically damaging to utter. It is the linguistic equivalent of closing a steel door. But doors once closed develop cracks. Through those cracks, we have learned that the triggering event was not a single threat, but a pattern. Digital intrusion attempts into the White House visitor entry system. Anomalous queries on the former president's medical records. A contract employee who failed a random polygraph and was escorted from the complex just hours before the evacuation. Individually, these are dots that go unconnected. Collectively, they form a constellation of risk. Let's talk about the polygraph. The employee in question had top-secret SCI clearance and worked in the old executive office building. They were questioned about unauthorized contact with a foreign national. They denied it. The polygraph suggested otherwise. By 10 p.m., they were off-site. By 3:47 a.m., the former president was in motion. The timeline is tight, too tight for coincidence. It suggests a direct causal line from the interrogation room to the motorcade lane. The foreign national in question is believed to be a mid-level attaché from an Eastern European embassy, a country we are not naming because the intelligence community has not yet determined whether this was an intelligence operation or a personal entanglement. But in the world of counterintelligence, motive is secondary to capability. The damage assessment is ongoing. What we do know is that the attaché left the country on a commercial flight at 6 a.m. the same morning. Now let's zoom out. This incident did not occur in a vacuum. It occurred against the backdrop of a bitterly divided transition of power, ongoing litigation regarding classified documents, and an unprecedented level of public distrust in federal institutions. Every single one of these factors informed the decision-making calculus. The Secret Service was not just protecting a man, they were protecting an institution from the potential fallout of whatever this man knew or possessed. The off-site location where the former president was taken is not a government facility. It is a privately owned compound in Virginia horse country, equipped with a secure communications suite installed during the previous administration. The owner, a defense contractor, has hosted numerous political figures, but he has never hosted a principal under these circumstances, effectively as a guest of the Secret Service, not as a friend of the family. The distinction is legally and logistically significant. We must interrogate the silence of the former president himself. He has made no public statement. His social media accounts, usually so active, have been dormant. His political action committee has issued only a terse acknowledgement that he is safe and in good spirits. Those close to him say he is deeply unsettled, not by the threat, but by the realization that he no longer controls the machinery that once existed solely to serve him. He is now a passenger, not a commander. The agents who remain on his detail are facing an impossible morale crisis. They are sworn to protect this individual with their lives, yet they were excluded from the decision to move him. They learned of the evacuation the same way the public did, through a leaked internal memo. Trust in the protective community is the only currency that matters. That currency has been severely debased. Several agents have requested transfers. One has already resigned. Let's talk about the vice president. He was informed at 4:15 a.m. via a secure call from the White House Situation Room. His first question, is this a coup? It is a testament to the times we live in that this was a legitimate question, not a paranoid fantasy. He was assured it was not, but he was not told what it was. He remains deeply frustrated by the lack of transparency. The relationship between the two men, already complex, is now further strained by this nocturnal rupture. The Speaker of the House was informed at 6 a.m., the Senate Majority Leader at 6:30. Both were briefed in person by the FBI Deputy Director. Both emerged from those briefings visibly shaken but utterly silent. This is the hallmark of a true national security incident. The people who know the most are the ones who speak the least. Their silence is not deference. It is terror of what they might inadvertently reveal. Historians will look back at this moment and ask the obvious question, what changed? The United States has had living former presidents since John Adams left Washington. None of them were ever physically removed from the White House in the middle of the night by their own protectors. This is not a precedent, it is an aberration. And aberrations in the world of power are almost never random. They are the visible symptoms of a deep systemic pathology. Consider the physical security upgrades made to the White House complex after 9/11. The perimeter is hardened, the airspace is restricted, the structural engineering can withstand a direct impact from a commercial aircraft, but no amount of concrete and Kevlar can protect against a threat that originates from within the trusted circle. The former president was not removed because the walls were weak. He was removed because the trust that held those walls together had dissolved. We have obtained through a confidential source a partial transcript of the radio traffic from that night. It is fragmentary, heavily redacted, but one phrase stands out. Eagle is airborne. This is not a reference to an aircraft. Airborne in Secret Service code does not mean flying. It means the principal is in transit and the destination is fluid. It is a state of maximum operational flexibility and minimum predictability. It is also a state of profound emergency. The destination ultimately became fixed, a secure room in a converted barn on that Virginia estate. The room has no windows. It has a single reinforced door. It is equipped with satellite communications and a direct line to the National Military Command Center. The former president spent approximately 14 hours in that room. He made calls, he received briefings. He did not ask when he could return to the White House. Perhaps he already knew the answer. The First Family's reaction has been carefully managed. The former First Lady was at their private residence in Florida when she received the call. She immediately boarded a plane, arriving at the Virginia compound by mid-morning. Witnesses describe a tense, whispered conversation on the landing pad. She did not embrace her husband. She stood with her arms crossed, listening. When she finally spoke, her voice was audible to the nearby agents. "What did you bring with you?" That question, "What did you bring with you?" may be the central mystery of this entire episode. The former president left the White House with nothing but his robe and slippers. He was given clothing at the compound. He had no briefcase, no bags, no documents. Yet his wife's question suggests she believed he had taken something, or perhaps that something had been taken from him. The ambiguity is agonizing, and it is entirely intentional. Let's examine the timeline of classified material. In the weeks prior to this incident, the National Archives had been in increasingly acrimonious communication with the former president's representatives regarding the return of documents. Some were returned. Some, according to sources, were not. Is it possible that the 3:47 a.m. extraction was in some way connected to a physical search of the residence? Could the Secret Service have been executing a protective evacuation and a document recovery operation simultaneously? We put this question to a former senior official in the National Security Division. He would not confirm or deny, but he did say this. When you move a principal at that hour, you're not just protecting the person, you're protecting the information they carry, the information they've touched, and the information that might be used against them. It's a triage operation. Triage. The word suggests that someone somewhere was making terrible calculations about what could be saved and what had to be abandoned. The abandoned items remain in the White House. The former president's personal laptop, normally kept in his study, was impounded by Secret Service technicians. His personal cell phone, the one with the encrypted app, was confiscated for forensic analysis. His briefing books from the previous day are still classified, but sources indicate they contain sensitive intelligence regarding a foreign power's efforts to recruit assets within the U.S. government. The dots are beginning to connect. We must also consider the possibility that the former president himself was the target of a recruitment effort. This sounds extraordinary. Former presidents are not typically considered vulnerable to foreign influence. They are too scrutinized, too insulated. But they are also paradoxically more vulnerable in some ways. They have left the protective infrastructure of incumbency. They are managing complex business interests. They are often surrounded by fixers and facilitators rather than counterintelligence professionals. This is the moment when a hostile service makes its move. The foreign power we suspect is not Russia, not China, not Iran. It is a country we traditionally consider an ally. This detail, if true, explains the extraordinary secrecy. It is one thing to accuse an adversary of hostile intelligence activity. It is quite another to confront a friendly government with evidence that it has been targeting a former American president. The diplomatic repercussions would be seismic. The intelligence community is proceeding with extreme caution. The former president's movements since that night have been minimal. He has stayed at the Virginia compound, venturing out only for brief pre-scheduled walks on the property, always accompanied by a full tactical team. The public has not seen him. The press has not photographed him. He has become, in effect, a ghost, present but invisible, powerful but confined. This is not a retirement. It is a quarantine. Let's talk about the legal dimensions. The Secret Service derives its authority from Title 18 of the United States Code. It is empowered to protect former presidents. It is not empowered to detain them, restrict their movement, or unilaterally determine where they may reside. By removing the former president from the White House and transporting him to a privately owned facility, the Secret Service arguably exceeded its statutory authority. No one is talking about this. No one is asking the question. The silence is deafening. Why has the former president not challenged this? He has a team of aggressive attorneys. He has a political platform. He has every incentive to fight back. His silence suggests either that he agrees with the necessity of his removal, or that he has been presented with evidence so damning that any public challenge would expose him to even greater peril. Either explanation is unsettling. Both point to a level of vulnerability we have never before associated with the American presidency. The media's failure to fully investigate this incident is a story in itself. Major networks reported the unscheduled movement as a minor logistical note. Cable news spent approximately 4 hours on the story before pivoting to a celebrity trial. The public, conditioned by a relentless news cycle, moved on. But the story did not move on. It is sitting there in the classified files, in the memories of the agents who were there, in the mind of a former president who now knows what it feels like to be escorted out of his own history. We have spoken to a retired Secret Service agent who served 3 presidents. He was not involved in this incident, but he understands the psychology. When you take the oath, he told us, you swear to protect the office and the occupant, but you also swear to uphold the Constitution. Sometimes those oaths conflict. On that night, someone decided that protecting the institution meant taking the occupant out of it. That decision will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The haunting has already begun. The agent who placed his hand on the former president's elbow has not returned to duty. He is on medical leave, reportedly suffering from acute anxiety. His colleagues say he has not spoken about that night. He does not need to. His face, when he left the compound after his shift, told the entire story. It was the face of a man who had done something irreversible, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Let's go back to 3:47 a.m. The vehicles are gone. The gate is closing. The officer in the booth is completing his log. The janitor is mopping the floor of the diplomatic reception room, erasing the footprints. The night shift operators are sipping coffee, unaware. The city sleeps. And somewhere in Virginia, a former president is sitting in a windowless room, staring at a secure phone that has not rung, waiting for someone to tell him what comes next. That call has not come. It may never come. And that silence, more than anything else, is the true shock of this story.